On the bad side of things, just as she did in Los Angeles, Dorothy would now show up periodically to whisk Etta away to an area that Etta reflects had streets that were filled with derelicts. Dorothy's apartment was infested with roaches, and Dorothy was also a slob. Her dresses and her underwear were just thrown everywhere on top of lamps. It just didn't matter. To make the situation even worse, there was only one bathroom on the floor for all the tenants on that floor to use. Etta always had to try to dodge dirty old men who was hanging out in the hallway and blinking at her and trying to feel her up. Meanwhile, Dorothy once again didn't keep food in the house, so Etta became a fan of butter and sugar sandwiches. When Etta left Los Angeles and moved to San Francisco, she turned into a completely different person from what she was prior to that. As a result, she was growing into a rebellious teenager. She joined a gang and she'd steal costume jewelry in order to sell it. And she'd turn around and use that money to buy blues records, which she'd come to prefer over her mother's jazz music. She bought Guitar Slims, The Things I Used to Do, and often played it as loud as possible. "Turn that crap off!" her mother would yell at her. In her time away from home, Etta had discovered boys too. Wine was cheap, and weed cost 50 cents a joint. She and her girlfriends would get some boys and find someone's dark basement and do stuff that exploring adolescent teenagers did. At the same time, Etta was getting tired of her misadventures with her mother. One of the last straws was when she'd taken Etta and a girlfriend of hers to Fresno and checked into a motel. As usual, she left to go run the streets. Then in the middle of the night, there was a loud banging on the motel room door. Then the knocking got louder. And the door busted open, and the sheriff and 3 deputies poured into the room. "Which one of you is Jamesetta?" the sheriff asked. After Etta identified herself, the cop said, "Well, get dressed. We're taking you down to the station. We've booked your mother for being in a house of prostitution." Etta wasn't sure why her mother gave the cops her name, and she didn't have any money to bail her out. Uncle Frank ultimately was the one who bailed her mother out. Later, Dorothy told Etta that she was at the whole house to, buy some weed. Alright then. Etta also had it up to here with her Uncle Frank's wife, who had also done something that was a last straw type moment. When Etta first got her period, Mary took her to the hospital to ensure that Etta was still a virgin. Her reasoning? She didn't want to be taking care of no devil's child. No longer wanting anything to do with her mother, her uncle, or his wife, Etta began to get close to the Mitchell family. They consisted of 2 sisters, Jean and Abyssinia, and their brother Alfonso. They didn't have her mother or father living with them. Jean was Etta's age, while both Abyssinia, who was known as Abby, and Alfonso, known as Fonz, were both 8 to 9 years older than Etta. Initially, Etta and Jean started singing at a rec center. A little later, Abyssinia joined them. The trio then became the singing group the Creolettes. They imitated groups like the Spaniels, the Swallows, and the Chords. When she was 14, Etta moved in with the Mitchells. Meanwhile, the Creolettes were winning amateur shows and beginning to become popular. Around this time, Hank Ballard and the Midnighters had a popular song called "Work With Me, Annie." While the song title doesn't even raise an eyebrow now, back in the 1950s, it was very controversial. That was because the word work was a code word for sex. While kids loved the song, most parents wouldn't allow their children to listen to that. Answer songs were a big thing at the time. With that in mind, Etta got the idea to write an answer song to Work With Me, Annie. As a result, she wrote a song titled "Roll With Me, Henry." The Creolettes worked on the song, then put it in their act. Not long after this, a night would come that changed Etta's life. That night, she got a phone call from Abby. Abby told Etta that she and Jean needed to come meet a man named Johnny Otis. Otis was an LA band leader who also was a songwriter and a promoter. Abby had been talking to Otis, and she had told him about the Creolettes. As a result, Otis wanted to hear them sing. Not believing her and just thinking she was just talking, Etta went to sleep. About an hour later, Abby called again and said that she was at the Manor Plaza Hotel. She told Etta and Jean that Otis still wanted to hear them sing. To Etta, she thought they just wanted these young girls to come down there so they could mess with some young chicks. Then, all of a sudden, Otis himself was on the phone. "I understand you girls can sing," he said, "and I'd love to hear you." At that time, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and buses had stopped running. Otis told Etta that they should catch a cab, and he'd pay for it when they got there. When the girls got to the hotel where Otis was, they sang 3 songs for him. Afterwards, Otis said, "Wow, did you hear that little girl sing?" Otis wanted the girls to go to Los Angeles with him the next day. His intent was to cut some records with the girls and to put him in his show. "How old are you?" he asked Etta. 18, she lied. And as we said earlier, at the time, she's only 14. Johnny knew she was lying, so he followed up with, "Can you get your mother to give you permission to travel with us?" At that particular time, Dorothy was in jail. "No problem at all," Etta responded. The next day, she showed up with a letter that she'd written and signed herself, having forged Dorothy's signature. That was good enough for Johnny. They all headed to Los Angeles. In one fell swoop, Etta was a 14-year-old girl that was dropping out of high school in the 9th grade, and she was also saying goodbye to her childhood. We're going to take a time out from our story to ask you to like, subscribe, share, comment, hit that notification bell, and repeat when it comes to our videos. Now, back to our story. Johnny would immediately change 2 things about the group. First, he changed their names from the Creolettes to the Peaches. Next, he changed Jamesetta Hawkins to Etta James. The day before Thanksgiving in 1953, the Peaches were cutting the song Etta had written, "Roll With Me, Henry." They cut it, then printed it on Thanksgiving Day. By Thanksgiving night, Johnny was playing it in the record store that he owned. Across the street from his store was the Red Hut, a hangout where Johnny did a radio show. This is where he made the record popular and began Etta's music career. And one day, Otis sold 500 copies of the song. However, even though the song was written by Etta, it used Hank Ballard's melody from Work With Me, Annie. As a result, after the song was released, the original song's publishers came looking for their piece of the pie, which of course they got. Additionally, in order to ensure that he personally got more money out of the song, Otis listed Etta as a co-writer of the song with his wife Phyllis. Etta didn't care, or she was just happy that she was on a record. But Gene and Abby were upset because Etta was getting all the attention. Even though the song was popular, some radio stations found it to be too explicit, too dirty. As a result, they wouldn't play it. To counteract this, the labels decided to change the song's name to the Wallflower. It didn't stop the popularity of the song, as it was still selling across the country. However, as happened often at that time, another version of the song was released by a white artist. This time, it was Georgia Gibbs, and her version was called "Dance With Me, Henry." It went on to sell over 1 million copies. Furthermore, Georgia got to perform the song on the hugely popular The Ed Sullivan Show. Meanwhile, Etta got to sing her version of the song at some dive bars in Los Angeles. Recording for Modern Records, Etta was on the same label at the time as B.B. King, John Lee Hooker, and Elmore James. While she was singing, Etta was also writing songs. She wasn't on salary, but she would get $25 to $30 if she wrote a song that the label liked. Etta, like many artists of that time, didn't know anything about writer shares, publisher shares, or any of that information. In October of 1955, Etta had another hit with Good Rockin' Daddy. The Peaches had also begun traveling with Otis and his musical revue. However, at one of the tour stops in Savannah, Georgia, Etta was talking to some people, and they were telling her that she was the hottest thing in the country. Etta was surprised to hear that because she had no idea how popular she was. Next, those same people asked her how much money she was getting paid. At the time, Etta was getting $30 a night. The people laughed when they heard this because they felt like Etta was a star and should be making a lot more money than that. After hearing this, Etta decided that she wanted to leave Johnny Otis' show. To that end, she got help from a man named Carl Peterson, who was now her agent. Peterson sent the Peaches on tour, but he stipulated that Etta's mother would have to go along too. With front money that she got from the Modern record label, Etta purchased a 1955 Cadillac DeVille, then proceeded to drive her from Los Angeles all the way to Dallas. Soon, though, it got repossessed because she hadn't been making the payments on it. Initially, Etta's mother thought that she could sweet-talk singer Fats Domino to loan them $500 in order to get the car back. However, Fats turned her down. Ultimately, Etta's agent was the one that gave them the money to retrieve Etta's caddy. Later, Etta's mother crashed the car, and they had to sit in Cleveland for almost 2 weeks waiting for it to get fixed. When they got home, Etta had in her mind that she wanted to go and leave Dorothy in Los Angeles. As a result, Big Jim Wynn, a saxophone player, became Etta's legal guardian. He increased Etta's salary and also introduced her to Johnny Guitar Watson. Watson would be a huge inspiration to Etta musically. Around this same time, Etta began to display the look that she would become known for later. She reflected that her image was largely created by gay guys. They were the ones who told her to play up her light-skinned complexion by dyeing her hair blonde. They also were the ones who told her not to dye her eyebrows. "Oh no, honey," they told her. "You leave the eyebrows dark. That's how all the bad girls look." By the way she carried on, Etta was trying to live up to her bad girl image. While at this point she wasn't having sex, she was, as a self-professed peeker, interested in seeing or watching all manners of debauchery. However, one particular scene was too much, even for Etta. At one party, she heard a familiar voice and entered the room where the voice was coming from. When she came in, she saw singer Bo Diddley operating his video camera. Diddley was already famous for constantly recording these types of explicit home movies. On the bed were the voices that Etta had heard. One of the voices came from her friend Blondine, a girlfriend of hers. The other voice belonged to the singer Little Willie John. Off on one side of the bed was Little Richard, who was enjoying watching what was going on. We'll leave the rest of it up to your imagination. Shortly after this, Dorothy made her way back into Etta's life. She told Etta that she should be making more money. Seems like people always telling her that. As a result, Etta changed booking agents. In Washington, Etta met Harvey Fuqua. Even though he was 9 years older than Etta, he'd become her first real boyfriend. Among other things, Etta was drawn to him because he was so dark-skinned. Thank you all for checking out our video. We appreciate you spending time with us. We're ending part 2 here. See you over at the part 3 video.